Warning: this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Give us 1 hour and we'll help you change the way you think about happiness. Harvesting Happiness with Lisa Cypers Kamen is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Each week, Lisa spotlights diverse trendsetters and change agents who are the greatest contemporary thinkers and doers, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. Your host, Lisa Cypers Kamen, is a widely recognized applied positive psychology expert, author, documentary filmmaker, and lecturer specializing in optimal lifestyle management. Let's get to it. Here's Lisa.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where you will learn about urban alchemy, restoring joy in our cities. My first guest is Majora Carter. Majora Carter is a real estate developer, urban revitalization strategy consultant, MacArthur Fellow, and Peabody Award-winning broadcaster. She is responsible for the creation of numerous economic developments, technology inclusion, and green infrastructure projects, policies and job training and placement systems. She currently serves as Senior Program Director for Community Regeneration at Groundswell, Inc. Carter applies her corporate consulting practice focused on talent retention to reducing brain drain in American low-status communities. Majora has firsthand experience pioneering sustainable economic development in one of America's most storied low-status communities, the South Bronx. She is the author of Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. Majora, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is a pleasure. I am super excited when I get to merge my interests of architecture and positive psychology and what it means to create a better and just life for all. Talk a little bit about what inspired you to write this book.
I wrote this book, because I'm from a low status community, which I'll explain briefly. It's the kind of community in which inequality is simply assumed by the people that are in it and those that are looking in. And so I'm from an inner city, but there are also, Native American reservations or all former poor white towns, that had like some kind of industry that had a lot of jobs, but they're all gone. And, being from a community like that, where we're taught to measure success by how far we can get away from those communities, really made me want to write a book about how you can create the kind of health and well-being emotionally and financially, spiritually even, by actually looking back at your own neighborhood and investing in it emotionally and spiritually and, of course, economically.
And as you speak, I think about this notion of running away versus leaning in, staying put. Mm-hmm. And I think as people, we are adverse to discomfort, right? So we're in an environment that is unpleasant or has bad memories, and we want to go away. We want to leave. And what I love about your work and your approach is that you are educating people to do like sort of the reverse logic here.
Yeah. I mean, look, Americans, I think in particular, love a Cinderella story. They love the idea of somebody, working really hard, coming from a bad neighborhood and pulling themselves up and out and then doing something great. But that really, especially when you look at the billions of dollars philanthropic and government money that go into those communities that people like to create these mythologies about, those communities are really suffering. And someone else is benefiting from all that money. And so for me, it was more about how do you help people see the value in their own community and by association themselves, because they're in it, and create the best lives that they can for themselves and show that you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one.
I want to ask about your experience growing up in the South Bronx. Did you leave and then come back, or you remained there throughout time?
No, I was about 7. As I talk about my book, when I started literally planning my escape. The beginning of the summer, just before I turned 8, the both buildings at either end of my block burned down. There was lots of financial disinvestment, and landlords were literally torching buildings in order to collect insurance money. And at the end of that summer, my brother was killed as a result of the drug wars that went on in the neighborhood. So yeah, I was one of those kids and there's like a whole well-oiled machine, that essentially says to kids like us, you're really smart, you've got a big brain, get out, you're going to grow up and be somebody, i.e. get out of here. And so that's what I did. And I did use education to do that.
And I think this taps into one of the subjects you talk about in your book, Reclaiming Your Community, and that is about the brain drain. Mm-hmm. And I would love for you to elaborate on that and the conditions in the South Bronx and your own personal story of the challenge of the brain drain versus reinvesting in community.
Right. And brain drain, when people think about it in general, they're thinking of someone coming from Africa or India, China, wherever, just some other, underdeveloped place. And then they're coming to America, to seek their fortunes and to build up their lives. But what we don't acknowledge is that brain drain happens in American low status communities every day. And so when we lose the talented ones in our community because we're not creating the right infrastructure for people to stay in their own hometowns and, live a good quality of life there.
I was going to ask about your community, and are there peers, friends, colleagues that are doing what you're doing? Are you seeing that reinvestment and return, sort of the repatriation of the neighborhood?
Repatriation. I like that. Our neighborhood, it's true. It's like we're not expats or bringing any over. That's hilarious. But yes, what's been super exciting is that for all, the talk, there's definitely stuff in the media about the South Bronx in particular being sort of like the last frontier of real estate development in New York City. And it's just really old and tiring. But what I find, most incredible and exciting is that there are, homegrown, talented people who are deciding to stay, open businesses, keep the family home and create opportunities here for themselves that honestly, I think not even a full generation ago, nobody was really trying to do. Like literally the expectation was to grow up and get out.
And how does that affect the kids that are coming up? Like, is it influencing them to see that it's worthwhile to get education, invest in community, be part of the community, rather than maybe get themselves into mischief, Yeah.
No, I think that's one of the most beautiful parts that happens. It's that, when folks will see me or, the kind of businesses that we've built that literally showcase the talent of our own community. Like I opened up a cafe called the Boogie Down Grind because that was, cafes and restaurants were some of the things that people who said that they were leaving the community in order to experience. And, this was my research and development lab. And so we wondered if by chance, if you created these kind of things, would you see would people want to stay? Yeah. And they do. Another really wonderful example, here is Noelle Santos, who did a crowdfunding campaign to open a bookstore in the South Bronx, which we did not have. And she combined her two great loves, wine and books. And
wow,
started the Lit Bar, lit for literature.
Love it.
Isn't it? It's great.
It's fabulous. What great marketing.
Exactly. And so people like her, are doing things, but these things are happening all over the country. And some of those examples I put in my book as well. And So I know that what it does is inspire people literally to just give their communities a second look and just question, whether or not this is something that they should be doing, as in leaving and trying to, look for the kind of life they want to live elsewhere.
Well, you mentioned the Boogie Down Grind, right? Your place. And it's sort of illustrative how if you build a place where people want to hang out, mm-hmm. You automatically get to become sort of the hub of the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, but what makes those places great, and we did, I'm super excited about, we did literally just won Best Cafe in New York City, 2021 magazine. But I think it was because of the role that the cafe itself played, which was basically just sort of the backdrop for all the community, talent to showcase itself. I mean, they would organize open mics and art events and credit repair workshops and things like that, because we developed a space so they can do it. So I really do believe that, community is not just a place, it's an activity.
Yeah.
But you need places in which to do that activity. And those places need to be the kind of things that encourage that approach, that way that people sort of want to put their best selves out there. So that's why I really do believe that, as a developer, I want to create the kind of spaces that make people feel like they have every right and reason to do something fabulous. Because when that impacts people and how they feel about themselves and what they want to put forward in the world.
And to speak about the word develop, right? Like real estate development, we often think of it's just about the buildings, right? And what I'm hearing you share and what I love so much about your work is that it's the creative side too. I mean, you're creating community with real estate.
Yes. I mean, well,
not just profit center.
Right. But how else are we going to do it? I mean, that's the thing, it's development has gotten such a bad taste. I mean, I think in part because, and I think historically it should. I mean, it's been more than 400 years where, the only folks that were able to do the development were the ones that were, within, the dominant, power structure and or literally have designed the type of communities that, have literally created this architecture of hopelessness and even I would dare say, that literally created the wealth gap, within our societies, between races and other cultures. And so it's not like it's not true. I mean, most real estate developers, I think, have absolutely benefited, a very, the top echelons of our society, and they benefit from it financially and everything else. And, because of the legacy of racism, it's often used as a lever to continue to oppress people. So I get why people have issues with development, which is why I'm like, we should be doing it ourselves, period.
Yeah. And you said something at the beginning of the conversation about, the spirit and soul of this. And I think that is what you are bringing to the table with your work and your perspective.
I'm certainly trying to. I mean, I absolutely consider the work that I do this is my personal ministry. As a Christian, my job is to love God and to love my neighbor. So building the kind of communities that show that is very personal to me.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll continue the conversation with Majora Carter. We're talking about her book, Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. To learn more about Majora and her work, please visit majoracartergroup.com, on Twitter @Majora Carter, on Facebook, Majora Carter, and guess what? On Instagram, Majora Carter. Here comes the break, and we'll be right back. Before we take that break, here's a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. Problems are just a fact of life, but solving them takes practice and skill. And whenever I'm confronted with a problem I can't manage alone, I head to my favorite therapist for good counsel. Because sometimes we all need a little help, and because good problem solvers are made by adopting the right mindset to solve them. Having a balanced mind not only helps us to be better problem solvers, but also helps us lead happier and more satisfying lives. Throughout my life, therapy has been instrumental in helping me stay focused, action-oriented, and meet challenges head-on. This means less stress and anxiety for me and the benefit of being a more confident and productive person. A good therapist is like having your own personal cheerleading squad to support you through the roller coaster of life. The best part is that BetterHelp is affordable, accessible, convenient, and entirely online. BetterHelp delivers therapy at your fingertips from the comfort of wherever you are, anywhere in the world. No driving, no parking, no waiting, no hassle. Want more skills to meet and manage life? Need to unload and stress less? Consider giving therapy a try, and BetterHelp is a great place to get the help you need. Get matched with a therapist quickly and easily after filling out a brief survey and switch therapists at any time. When you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit betterhelp.com/harvestinghappiness to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/harvestinghappiness. Now let's take that brief pause. We'll be right back.
To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com and explore Lisa's experiential on-site brain fitness workshops, corporate programming, and speaking engagement services.
And we're back. But before we return to the conversation, I want to mention how good it feels to clean house. You know what I mean, getting rid of clutter and things we no longer use, like precious jewelry. You might be sitting on hidden assets that could be put to creative use elsewhere. Think about your unworn jewelry that's been sitting in your jewelry box for months or maybe even years. With Worthy, you can turn your diamond jewelry into a long-delayed vacation, seed money for a passion project, that home improvement you've been dreaming of, or even extra cash for the holidays. I'm one of those people who is lightening my material load in favor of adventurous travel, and that's why I've partnered with Worthy to help. It makes me happy to share this secret to unlocking your treasure chest that will turn diamond jewelry into cash, fast and risk-free. Worthy experts do all the work, and their competitive auctions get you up to 3 times more than what a local jeweler would offer, all in as little as 2 weeks. For my listeners, Worthy is offering a special deal. Visit worthy.com/HH to get an extra $100 when your jewelry sells for over $1,500. That's worthy.com/HH for an extra $100. With Worthy, you can finally cash in on that hidden asset in your jewelry box. Visit worthy.com/HH to get started today. Now let's get back to it. And we're back talking about urban alchemy, restoring joy in our cities. Let's get back to the conversation with my guest today, Majora Carter. Majora, prior to the break, you mentioned a phrase that I thought was really quite brilliant, and that is the architecture of hopelessness. Mm-hmm. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about that and about sort of the predatory nature of traditional real estate development and how it affected your perspective and led you to develop the way that you do.
Sure. We see that there's 2 types of real estate development in low status communities. There's the one that's, I think, more typically thought of as gentrification, which leads to displacement. Property, people come and buy up the property, et cetera, and then displace the folks. And the other kind is called poverty level economic maintenance, in which there's more than, you see the affordable housing, federal usually subsidies come into for low income housing to be built, all rental. You'll see things like payday loan places and check cashing stores instead of banks or credit unions. You'll see things like instead of having great diverse options to get a bite to eat, instead you'll see sort of like low grade supermarkets, if you see them at all. But usually it's corner stores and maybe the frozen food section of a 99 cents or dollar store. And so when you see those type of things, it sends a message, to what you see, what you think about your community. We call the second kind poverty level economic maintenance, because someone's making money, but it's not the people in the communities.
Yeah.
So when people start to see things in those neighborhoods like doggy daycares or cafes, in places where they didn't see them before, there's often like, oh my goodness, that's when gentrification starts. But that's not true. Really, when it starts is when people don't see the value in their own community. And that's what makes those communities vulnerable, because other folks do. And that's when you can start seeing the impacts of gentrification. When an old lady lives in her house and her kids didn't want, the place because they were part of that brain drain train and, left the community and don't see any reason to want to stay. And then they sell the house to a predatory speculator. That predatory speculator is definitely banking on people not understanding the value of their homes. And that is one of the reasons why there's such a huge wealth gap. One of the reasons, why our communities seem to be developed without us in them.
Yes. Yes, developed without the stakeholder actually being at the table, hence this convenient prey.
Mm-hmm. That is exactly it.
So how have you changed the game of real estate development?
Well, I don't know if I've changed the game. I've just gotten in it. and that is, hard enough.
I can imagine.
Yeah. I didn't, have an uncle in the business, or certainly someone saying, here, let me give you your first $1 million, to do a project. And if you mess it up, here's another $1 million, and those are true stories. And
mm-hmm.
Not which happened to me, obviously, but it seems like, but understanding that, that old saying, like, all relationships are about real estate, they really are. And it all comes down to it. So that's why it just became clear to me that we needed to be the ones who were working, at least in part, on developing the kind of things that actually meant something to us as a community. Not that, it all has to be, community owned or whatever. It's like, I have no problem with people, including myself, actually making money as I do this. But I absolutely believe that the kind of sensitivity and the type of projects that I'm interested in building, quite frankly, are much more meaningful and holistically more regenerative of our communities than most anything I've ever seen, happen in our communities.
And the return on that investment beyond the value of the money is that you then have this renaissance in the community where people are flourishing.
Right, exactly. And that is not the prime objective of any of the development that I've seen, mostly in my own community. And seeing and hearing you say that, it's just like, that's why I can't remember who did the study with, it was at Rockefeller or another one of those big foundations, but they were like, oh my goodness, we discovered that when people who are from those communities they're more sensitive to the community's development, and you see like the kind of projects that actually have better impacts for the people that live there. And I was just like, really?
Yeah, this is not rocket science.
Like, guys, like, so this is how you spend your money.
Right.
It's really so annoying. But anyway, whatever. That's
and no PhD required for this logic,
None, but it's probably spent like $1 million studying that, and didn't support any of the small developers that are trying to do that work. But I'm just saying that's another part of my book, when I talk about philanthropy.
Well, I think about the South Bronx, which is not a small place, right? It's, I guess in the scheme of a state, it is, but there are thousands of small towns in America in particular that have fallen into disrepair, or there's disinterest, or there's dispassionate participation in those communities. Right. And this model can work.
Right. Well, mostly because people feel as though, the reason why, people give up on their communities because they feel like there's nothing there, to have, hope in. And if they keep seeing the same things happen over and over again, and nothing seems to get better, except the continued concentration of all the things that make them feel bad about being there in the first place. There's no love there. And you will want to leave. And that's why, reclaiming your community, I think I'm hoping does become this kind of conversation that gets sparked amongst folks, who are just asking that question, was why do we have to move out in order to feel like we're living in a great place? It happens so often, but generally most folks are not asking that question. They're just leaving if given the opportunity.
I have to say that until the last 3 or 4 years, I didn't really ask that question myself. And then because I spend part of my time in a part of New York where there was kind of like the great test tube lab experiment. And I'm thinking of Kingston, New York, which at one time was a very, thriving city. IBM had a huge presence there. And then once IBM pulled out, the whole place kind of went to pot.
Right. Yep, exactly. And that's a perfect example, of a low status community. And now I understand, they're working to do some things people, and I'm just, and I do hope, and I don't know enough about the projects that are going on there about actually who's leading them, but I do hope that there are like some native Kingstonians, who are actually a part of it and not just, the speculators who recognize, oh, real estate's really cheap. Let me go in there and do that. And again, there's going to be some of that, no matter what.
Yes.
But there should also be some amount of the type of development that happens just because people are there and see their community and for the value that it has for themselves and their families and their community in general.
Another small city I'm thinking of where I've witnessed this actually firsthand because I've spent time there because there are some great restaurants is Newburgh.
Uh-huh.
Which has the benefit of some really beautiful architecture.
Yeah, yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I'm sure there are, like I said, thousands of these towns across America. And I think one of the upsides of the plague, if there can be one, and I'm speaking of COVID, is that there was this mass exodus from cities because people realized, A, they could work from anywhere, and B, they wanted a kinder, gentler, more simple life that was affordable.
Right. Very true.
And I think that is, the more I talk to people, the more I hear about people moving here and there and going back home in air quotes, because home makes sense.
Yeah, and it does. And I obviously encourage that.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but I want to touch upon the notion of planning with joy, because you write about this in your book, Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you're doing something that you love, you'll find, hopefully you'll find joy, in it, even in the sort of difficult, times. And I know it was certainly helped, that I was certainly going through some tough times at the time. My father was soon to pass away during that time. And, there I was trying to work on reimagining a dump and transforming it into a park, for others to. And it was those moments when I realized this is way bigger than I am. And, and just to be able to see and imagine life changing dramatically for others was something that did motivate me and move me and remind me that, I've got a bigger purpose than literally what's right in front of me at the moment.
And you, going back to what you said about this work being your ministry, I think that when we talk about human happiness and living a life of contentment that is fulfilling and passionate, you found that, and it resonates with the work, and therefore the return on investment, not to keep going back to that phrase, is a price more valuable than money.
No, I think you're right. It does have to be a return on your investment. I think spiritually, and otherwise, because it's the reason why, I think, spiritual folks, feel like that life can be more joyful is because there's they know that that's not all there is. Right. Yeah. And, and it's kind of this is just momentary stuff. They're things will change tomorrow. And they do.
Guaranteed. And I should say, you and I are not knocking money.
Not at all.
Not at all. I mean, we're okay with making a buck.
Absolutely. And I want more people to do that.
Yeah.
And, or even if they're not, I think that their lives should not be so horrific because it's without. And I do think that there's ways to build community where everyone benefits, regardless of how much they're making.
And to raise all ships. I think that this kind of work, it elevates everyone, whether they even realize it or not.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what's been so encouraging about this. We've gotten love, from, folks that are doing really well, in our community, even those that are definitely not. And, because there's still plenty of poverty here. There's still, yes. And, but I do think that people see the value and dare I say, just joy, of seeing a community that is, becoming happier, as a result of the physical projects that they're seeing and experiencing. And
with that increase of happiness also comes an increase of health. whether it's physical health, emotional health, fiscal health.
All related.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it is.
Absolutely. Thank you for raising that. I find that, I often say that, economically disempowered people, are real easy to push around.
Yeah.
And politically, economically, culturally, but it does say something when people feel like, okay, I've got something to lose, but I've got something to gain. And I have there's like something about me right now where it's just sort of like, I understand value.
Yeah.
And I do think it has something to do with that.
We are out of time, but it makes me think there's another conversation that you and I need to have, which I'm going to tell you about once we get off of here.
I can't wait.
Yeah. Majora Carter, thanks for joining me today. We've been talking about reclaiming your community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. To learn more, please visit majoracartergroup.com on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm going to streamline it this time. You can find Majora at Majora Carter. Here comes that pause. We'll be right back.
Did you know that happiness is actually good for your health? Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect with us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and follow Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for a daily dose of inspiration.
And we're back. We're talking about urban alchemy, restoring joy in our cities. My next guest is Molly Rose Kauffman, and she is the director of the University of Orange, a free people's university dedicated to education for equitable cities. She co-founded the organization in 2008 alongside her mother and grandmother, who happens to be a friend of mine, and I didn't know it until like 5 minutes ago. Which makes me very happy, Molly. We're talking about really what it takes to create a community, what it takes to really empower and restore some of these beautiful cities across our great land. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it is a pleasure. Let's talk about the University of Orange, which is located in Orange, New Jersey. And the project is being an intergenerational project that you co-founded along, like we said, with your mother and your grandmother and other community leaders. And the lessons and practices from the collective history that is alive and present in the work today.
Sure, absolutely. So, like you said, I co-founded the University of Orange in 2008 alongside my grandmother, Maggie Thompson, and my mom, Dr. Mindy Foley Love, and many other people who were active around the city of Orange at that time, including people who were active in community development or passionate about local history, and people who were just excited to be a part of the city of Orange at that time in 2008. So we say at University of Orange that you can learn the whole history of U.S. cities right within Orange, New Jersey. Orange is a small city, about 2.2 square miles, and it's outside of Newark, but about a 30-minute train ride from New York Penn Station on New Jersey Transit. And so at that time in 2008, Orange was really grappling with what cities across our country are grappling with in terms of the many processes and policies that have undermined the health and well-being of our cities, including urban renewal and deindustrialization and disinvestment, going back to redlining and now facing gentrification. So just this whole series of practices that really cause a lot of upheaval, both to the physical integrity of the city and to the social fabric of the city. So Orange was really kind of struggling with where is it headed at that time. But at the same time, it's like this super, super interesting place that has this really fantastic history. It's walkable. There's people there from all over the world. It's a place that just people love so much. There's gems on every street, like fantastic bakeries, someone making a really delicious pupusa. So people had this concept that kind of emerged from various threads of work and exploration that was, what if we think about the city itself as our university, how much can we learn from this place? And instead of trying to just solve our problems from focusing on the problems, what if we really think about all the amazing things that are here? And if we're looking to ourselves and our neighbors as our teachers, how much can we learn and share? So that was really where this seed of the University of Orange planted. And I think at the time it was such a playful, almost lighthearted concept, but while also being gravely serious. So it just really kind of kept snowballing from there.
Well, when I think about the university and what you offer and this sort of what drives it, it's this notion that within the community, all the tools and resources exist. Let's go there. Let's tap into what we have. This rich texture of experience, stories, skills, tools.
Yeah, and so we say my co-director, Aubrey Murdoch, who joined us, became part of our team when she was a graduate student and started working with us on a project where we worked with middle schoolers to write a history book about Orange for third graders. And so Aubrey really talks about this concept, which became one of our core urbanism principles. We have 4 urbanism principles, but there is one: everything we need is already here. And I think we find that often people are looking outside in terms of who can we be attracting to come live in our place, as though that's going to make it better. In our area, there's this real idealization of the looking for someone who's going to be commuting into New York City, like we're right on the train line, so there's a fast commute into Midtown Manhattan. So this idea of, when I first started working in Orange, and my mom was raised in Orange, my grandparents were activists in Orange, so that's how I ended up a part of this work of University of Orange. When I first really started becoming a part of life in the city there, it was 2008, and people would often say, how can we be like the next Hoboken? But embedded in that was meaning, how are we attracting kind of 20-somethings and that sort of this vision of bringing in people who aren't necessarily settling down roots and bringing their families. Like developers are building apartments that have studios and 1 bedrooms, but what happens? Where are the family-sized apartments being built? So how are we not looking outside in that sense? How are we looking around at who's actually in our city and what's actually going on, and then thinking about how to put supports and connections underneath that for things to flourish.
And you also talk about advocating for equity in urban planning, which is something that Majora focused on in the previous segment. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, because Orange is a really nice city.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I'm so happy to hear you say that, because I think it really is.
It's a gem.
It really is a gem. Yeah, it's such a lovable place. In terms of advocating for equity, I think there's several things that we try to do along that end. I think a key initial step is acknowledging that all of the policies and practices that my mom, Dr. Mindy Foley-Love, and her colleague, Dr. Roderick Wallace, have called serial forced displacement. So looking back at the past over 100 years of urban planning in the United States, we have to acknowledge that there are policies that were really the enactment of racism in our society, on our physical and built environment, and that these policies really left places physically and socially fractured. So when we're thinking about equity, we're thinking about how we understand the way that these policies lived in our environments, what that looks like, so that we understand what we're dealing with as we move forward. But we're also thinking about how are we recreating and renewing and making new connections so that people are able to work together and identify their shared goals and visions for their place. Because when people are too cut off from each other and too siloed from one another, they don't have the capacity to have the political power needed to advocate for what they want to see and how they want to live in the face of the development that's kind of bulldozing towards us.
And I would imagine that for the University of Orange, that when the pandemic hit, it really kicked your work into high gear, because not only were you trying to advance the 4 key principles of urbanism principles, but also you had a community to take care of that suddenly became disparate and remote.
Sure. So, just to go back, you mentioned the 4 principles. So I'll just say what they are so that we're covering all 4. So the first one is acknowledge and fight racism. The second is keep the city in mind. And that's something that my mom writes about in her book, Urban Alchemy, Restoring Joy to America's Sorted Out Cities, is the concept of city in mind, which comes from her teacher of urbanism, Michelle Cantal-Dupar, who said the same way a doctor knows that to treat a boil, you have to treat the whole body. An urbanist knows that if there's a problem in a neighborhood, there's a problem in the city. So when we talk about keeping the city in mind, we're acknowledging that if there's a problem in Harlem, that means that there's a problem in Wall Street, right? So that's
yes, indeed.
And then our final 2 principles, are there's never nothing there. This one is hugely important to us because we find that often that narrative of, oh, there's nothing there, is a narrative that people use to take other people's land, and there's always something there, even, it might look like just an empty field to you or I, but we don't know what memories it holds. We don't know what ecological systems it's helping to support. So there's never nothing there, and everything we need is already here, which we talked about. For us, when the pandemic started, we had really always, for the most part, been a very in-person organization. Like, we have potlucks, we do things, we take people on walking tours. We were very face-to-face. That's always the kind of organization we were, but we committed just right away to figuring out how to move online and how to really think about what we had learned since 2008 and how those principles could help us figure out what we could offer at that time. And I think we also really dug into how do we think, what does it mean to be a free school? What does it mean to be a free people's university? So how were we really taking the time with our community members to examine and dig into emerging issues? So we had all kinds of reading groups and talks and, some really goofy things like, fun cooking classes online. I mean, they were not goofy, but some activities that were really playful, and we did some things that were very serious, but trying to make sure we maintain connection, but also space for learning together just became even more meaningful and important to us than it had been.
Would you say that being able to keep the community stitched together during COVID through the digital campus, that people's mental health was less affected?
Yeah, I would say that. And I don't want to speak for a large, I don't want to overstate it for a large group of people, but I think for the people who were able to stay connected and feel like we were engaging in larger conversations. I mean, we had a reading group where we read a book by Dr. Rob Wallace, which is called Dead Epidemiologist on the Origins of COVID-19, in which he makes the connections between agribusiness, like large-scale agriculture, and pandemics. And, it's frightening because it puts in your mind that, on the larger scale societally, we're not making any of the right choices to keep ourselves safe moving forward unless we radically change our behavior in so many ways. But it also felt so grounding to be like, okay, yeah, we're really looking at the structural root causes of this together. And I think that helped us feel more sane. But that said, I don't want to say our community has, like everywhere else, taken huge hits from the pandemic. And we've seen so many small businesses close. We've lost so many lives. So one of our community leaders just hosted a citywide COVID memorial, and that was a very beautiful event to, just start to acknowledge what we've all been through.
Which has been traumatic, filled with losses and this separation and disconnection. But I'm wondering, because the community is so beautifully held together by this sense of place, which leads me to another question, which I would love to ask you about placeness after we come back from the break. We're going to continue the conversation with Molly Rose Kauffman. To learn more, please visit universityoforange.org and on Instagram, U of Orange. Once again, Instagram is U of Orange. Here comes the pause. We'll be right back to keep talking with Molly Rose Kauffman.
Who says money can't buy happiness? Whether you are a skeptic or seeker, check out Lisa's new book. Are we happy yet? 8 Keys to Unlocking a Joyful Life. A boot camp manual for greater emotional fitness is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, IndieBound, and harvestinghappiness.com. Here's a truth bomb. Emotions are contagious, and happiness is a universally desired state. But we tend to forget that we all have the freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable each day, regardless of external circumstances. Explore the journey of human happiness, how to find it and keep it, with Lisa's documentary film, H Factor. Where is your heart? Visit harvestinghappiness.com to learn more.
We're back, continuing the conversation with Molly Rose Kauffman. We're exploring urban alchemy, restoring joy in our cities. Let's get back to it. So, Molly, we're talking about the University of Orange, a free people's university dedicated to education for equitable cities. I want to talk about how joy rules the roost over there, because it's obvious to me, but I want to hear it from you.
Sure. So, as I was saying earlier, there was always a joyous element from the launching of University of Orange. I think there was an initial inspiration that was really grounded in, if we just look around, there's so much happening here. So how are we just a simple act of uplifting what was already going on was exciting, and brought about this playful quality. Like at our first graduation, we revisited like this email thread that the founders of University of Orange had started, and it was a lot of jokes like, I'm gonna start a sorority, or like our sports ultimate frisbee, or things that are also were serious, but that playful quality I think has always been present. I think there's also real joy and pleasure that we're able to take from being in intergenerational learning spaces. I think often we overlook the fact that our learning spaces can be very age restrictive, and you're often only in learning environments with people who are your same age and demographic, and also often have your same educational level. So our learning spaces, I think, can be very joyful in that way. And then there's also a constant engagement with the magic of exploring our cities and our places. We love to offer walking tours and one of them has the theme, everything you want to know about U.S. cities you can learn in Orange, New Jersey. But There's always that new discovery.
Your mom gave me that tour. Your mom took me on a best day ever. And I said she was your grandmother earlier. And Dr. Mindy Fullylove is Molly's mom and my friend. And we met through a presentation we both shared together for Amazon in the middle of the pandemic. That's how we became friendly. So your mom took me on a best day ever. And she was like a kid. Infectious with her humor and her curiosity and her wonder and her delight. And that was so joyful. And I can only imagine that this extends to the work that's done at the university.
Yeah, I think we have this sense where we glamorize certain cities and certain types of experiences. So, and this, like I truly love walking around Paris, but sort of this idea that like, like there are these cities that are just like better, and that a lot that other places are just kind of not really, like, just people hold in low esteem, and but actually I think once you start really thinking in terms of urban alchemy, you realize that everywhere has so much magic to offer, because as you're walking, you can read the story of a place in the landscape, and you can see the places where people invest in their neighborhoods and communities with their love, with their whole heart, and so you see like the gardens they planted and the things that they're baking and the treats that they're offering to their neighbor. And once you're able to connect with that magic, that's really where the joy comes in. And so for us walking around Orange, it's never really rote. Like, I've given the same tour so many times, but for me, each time there's always like a new discovery or a delightful surprise. So it's always worth it to continue to just walk around your place and see what's happening on the streets today.
One of the classes at the University of Orange is on placemaking. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about what that means in its context, because to me, it's artistic and it's about storytelling and it's about weaving. And I think it gives a flavor of the essence of what we're really speaking of.
Yeah, so it's an annual spring event that we have every year sometime in April. And it started around our founding year when University of Orange was helping create, helping gather community input for a neighborhood plan that a local community development organization was writing. So we brought together all these people and we walked around the neighborhood and we shared our ideas, and this information went into a plan. But then we kind of realized that a plan shouldn't just sit on a shelf. It should be a living thing. So we held a follow-up event the next year where we really revisited the themes and goals in the plans, and then started to think about how we could be enacting them while still waiting on what was happening in terms of the development or where the city was going to put an investment. Like, if we want public art, how are we making public art? And so we've done all kinds of things. We generally host urbanists and residents around that time. So we invite people who are activists and planners and designers and artists, all kinds of people from all over whose work we want to learn from. And they spend time with us, hang out in Orange, share their work. And that's really exciting. And then, yeah, we've done all kinds of things, like held a bench making contest to think about how we enliven public space. And to build up to that, we also had workshops where people learned how to make benches. And then people made amazing benches that like looked like hats and faced different directions. So yeah, so for us, that's a really fun time. And we've done projects with storytelling. That's something really important to our practice at University of Orange as well. I think that really goes back to our principle of there's never nothing there. And that really, when we look at this series of policies we talk about when we think about serial forced displacement, like redlining and urban renewal and planned shrinkage, that so much of that is because there's been an ability to create a dominant narrative of a place being not worthwhile and having no value because there's nothing there, or it's dangerous, or it's so. For us, creating space for people to collect and share their stories of place helps create this mosaic of narratives that we think helps disrupt those dominant narratives that can be so destructive.
And brings a different kind of wealth to the city, to the environment. It's a different currency as well.
Yeah, it's true. And something we've seen, for example, with people who now been working with U of O since 2008. So a sort of real pleasure is being able to have people who I've worked with when they were teenagers now be real like colleagues in terms of our organizing. But some of that we've really seen from engaging young people with this kind of narrative and storytelling work. We've seen that really lead to political engagement in such interesting ways.
Which I think is the point in a certain sense, right? That we become more deeply invested in our communities, more protective and wanting to change for the greater good.
Yeah.
at the common good, so it's which is very, very inspiring. And that is what I felt in the time that your mom took me on that tour, that this is a vital, vibrant, evolving community. And it is all there. Like, I mean, with great food, by the way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Very important.
It is important. Yeah.
Well, what have you learned about yourself in the context of the University of Orange? Because you came from a different background from what I could see.
Yeah, so I was working in journalism, and I had recently finished my master's degree at Columbia Journalism School when I ended up working at U of O, and it was interesting for me because it very much wasn't the career path or life path I intended, but there was a very specific moment when I felt just 100% called to be doing this work, and there was a resonance that was so clear that it was like, oh, well, this is what I'm going to be doing. So I guess in that sense, I learned something about trusting that instinct, and a definite, for me, there's a joy in being a part of something where we're able to co-create. And I think because we try to be really clear about our values and principles, we're able to attract people who have a lot of integrity, but also a lot of creativity. So there's this real endlessness about what a Free People's University can be. I don't think we'll ever reach the end of the possibility of what it can be. So, for example, we have this really, really incredible music department that works to connect the various musical communities of Orange and host classes and festivals and all different kinds of stuff, and is led by a super interesting group of local musicians. So being able to have almost this like platform where people can come and build out their ideas, it has been so exciting to me.
Molly, thank you for sharing about the University of Orange, your work, and really inspiring us in urbanism principles. To learn more about the university, please visit universityoforange.org and on Instagram at @uoforange. And please give your mom a big hug from me.
I will. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guests, Majora Carter and Molly Rose Kauffman, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day, and remember to be kind to one another.
Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes via our free app or from our libraries at toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, and other fine podcast platforms. To learn more about Lisa's global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU Radio Malibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.